Well, hi there, I'm Noah Bradley. This is Handmade House TV. And on today's episode, I'm going to share with you some insights, some considerations to keep in mind if you're considering salvaging a vintage antique log cabin. So stay tuned. Well, hi there. Once again, thanks for tuning in here to Handmade House TV. On today's episode, I thought I would answer a question for you that I get quite often from particularly members of the Handmade House Guild, but also some of you viewers here on YouTube about whether or not this log cabin is worthy of my consideration as far as salvaging it for the logs to reuse on a future log cabin that you want to build for yourself. And here recently I got this particular email that someone sent me with about a half a dozen photographs of a log cabin that they had found for sale, and went out and take a look at it. And they asked me, is it worth getting involved in? Are the logs worthy of salvaging into here? And the only description I got of it was that the person selling it told them that it was of vintage chestnut logs, which unfortunately most people think that their log cabin is chestnut. And as you have pointed out in earlier videos, chestnut is a great wood, but it's not the end all. There are a lot of other fine species. In fact, there are other species of logs that I like better than chestnut. So you always go look at a log cabin with a little bit of a dubious eye whether or not they're chestnut or not, but what you're looking for are many other features. And so if I may, I'd like to share with you here today the photos that I was sent and make some comments as we go along here. So here's the first photograph. The first thing that you notice is that the roof is collapsed on the structure and that it's pretty short in stature. I look over and I notice that this log here on the top left, and that's a good indicator to me that there was probably a log above it, a top plate, and that it's probably had fallen off. And here we see something down in the grass that probably is that log, and chances are that log / top plate is now rotted and no longer any good. The logs, as I said before, the logs have been stated as being chestnut. And as far as I can tell, as close as I can look, it's really hard to tell by looking at photographs the particular species of a log, but it very well might be chestnut. And one of the indicators of chestnut is, first of all, it's typically in pretty good shape. It takes a lot to wear out chestnut. A lot of times chestnut will have a center crack in the middle of it, much like poplar does, but it's often less pronounced than what poplar is. I wouldn't think that these particular logs are poplar, even though poplar is common in the area where this cabin was found. I believe it's in Tennessee. And but my inclination is that it very well could be chestnut. And the one thing to always be cautious about with chestnut is that it tends to rot, if it rots at all, from the inside out. And so before I made any particular evaluation of these logs, I'd probably go around with some kind of blunt instrument, whether it's my knuckles or a hammer, and tap on it to see whether or not there's any hollow sound. If there's a hollow, chances are I would avoid the logs altogether. The one thing that I really admire about these particular logs is they're hewn beautifully. They're spaced apart really nicely. They're not exact as if they came off of a manufacturing assembly line. They're not too close together that would cause rot. They're not too far apart that makes a cabin look more like a chinked cabin rather than a log cabin. And so it's very attractive. It's very pretty. And also on this particular side, I like seeing that there's a door opening, but there's no window openings. A lot of times when you're looking for a vintage log cabin to reuse, you want to see as little openings as possible. The more openings you see, the shorter little pieces you have of a log, the less long logs you have, the less material you have to use on your own particular cabin, and the more restricted you are as far as you're not having enough logs to build the log cabin of your dream, the layout, but you're going to be more and more confined to the log cabin that exists on this property as it is. So by having this, you got some nice log lengths on both sides of the doorway. On this next image, we see that the logs are indeed nice again, and as they go up, they appear to be nicer. And that's likely a contributing factor to all of the moisture that comes up from the ground and from any of the overgrowth that we see around this particular structure. Here we can see that the bottom log is basically gone, and the log above it looks a little bit like it could go either way. I'd say there's a 50-50 chance that the log is still sound, and there's a 50% chance that it might be rotted. Now, as we go over to this next image, here we see the bottom course on each side of the log cabin is bad. And that's not very surprising. It's down close to the ground. It's prone to moisture and prone to insect attacks. And I would think that this is fairly common, that the vast majority of vintage log cabins that you see, the bottom course after a couple hundred years has basically rotted out. Now here on this image, my first impression is it's pretty scary with that one log up in the top ready to fall and perhaps to kill someone. And if we notice on the other end, we see that the remaining log on this end actually protrudes and does not have the notching for a typical log up there, which is another indication that the log that's missing is the top plate. And I suppose during the collapse of the roof that it was thrown out into the front yard, and again, it's likely bad. So this is the height of the cabin as it was. Now typically, when it comes to log cabins and getting the height correct, we like to build as tall of a log cabin as we want. So this cabin was built on the short side. The top plates are missing and the bottom course of the logs are rotted, and chances are there are other logs missing as well. So we're automatically concerned that there's not enough logs here in order to build a log cabin on our property with just these logs being used. We also noticed that the logs on this side of the cabin are in really good shape. A lot less wear and tear than what we saw on the other side of the home. So most likely this was the back of the cabin, that would be my best guess, or maybe it was underneath a porch that came off of the main roof, and the logs on this particular side were protected a whole lot more than the other side. But as we look down on the particular cabin, we notice as it gets down, we see that more and more moisture is coming in and more weathering of the logs has occurred. We're also thankful that on this side of the cabin there's also, once again, no windows. So we have a good selection of longer lengths logs on this side. Also, I can't help but notice the homemade ladder on this one end. I wouldn't climb that for $1 million. It's a good lesson in looking at all the growth that's growing up on the side of this cabin. You can definitely see that the logs in the area wherever these plants are growing is definitely under a lot of duress, a lot of stress, a lot of rot potential because of the moisture that plants bring to the logs. It's never a good idea, particularly on a log cabin, but on any type of home, to have plantings too close to the home. It just creates a moisture environment that's just extremely challenging for a house to endure. One other thing that we can notice while we're looking at this image is that we can take a peek inside of the log cabin, and we see that the interior faces of the logs are in really good shape. As a matter of fact, they're beautiful from everything I can see. And then it's not uncommon, I've done it before, where you can take down a log cabin where the exterior of the logs looks really rough, really something that's not aesthetically appealing, but the inside is beautiful. And so it's very possible to use logs that are bad on the outside, but really attractive on the inside. And you put them up and you side over the exterior of the cabin, and you have an interior that's just breathtakingly comfortable and cozy and will last for hundreds of years into the future. On this next image, we see that this is the end that's opposite the chimney end of the home. Once again, no windows or doors at all on this side. The overgrowth is pretty bad, and notice the one challenge in taking down any structure is poison ivy growing up in this one spot. You want to be really careful in pulling down poison ivy. A lot of folks believe that they are immune to it, but when it's in an extreme green growth stage as this, it makes me itch just looking at the photograph. The logs are somewhat weathered on this side, but I believe that they're sound and very attractive and usable. On this next image, we see another corner of the cabin, and yes, it too shows that the bottom courses are bad. But there, notice this one log. It's just a really nice log. It shows a little bit of weathering, but just admire that half dovetail notch in the corner, how tight it still is. And you notice that the weathering on the end of the log there, this indicates a vintage log cabin, one that's seen a lot of weathering going on. This would be fairly typical of species such as chestnut that will show some weather, but still a lot of durability held in there. These notches that look like this are plenty strong enough, they're plenty sound enough, and in fact, to some people, including myself, I find it very attractive. But the one challenging aspect of having logs that look like this on the end is that anytime you have to replace a log, chances are you're going to have a fresh cut on the new log that you put into place there, and that fresh cut is going to stand in stark contrast to these more weathered notches you see on the corner there. It's really hard to get the two to meet together, and frequently when I have a situation like this, I'll just count on having to re-notch all of these corners even though they're weathered, which means that if you were to reuse this cabin and you were to completely re-notch all of the logs in it, that the cabin is going to be necessarily a couple of feet shorter in each dimension because of the cutoff and the re-notching going on. So what is my opinion of this particular log cabin? Is it worthy of salvage? The short answer is yes, it is definitely worthy of salvage. And one of the things that really shines for me in looking at this particular cabin is this gorgeous stone chimney that's on the end here. It's rare to see a stone chimney where the stones are shaped of a size that almost look like large brick. They are irregular. They're not too much exactly alike, but they're the perfect size for handling. Anyone could build an attractive chimney using these particular stones. It's easy to salvage a stone chimney. You just basically come in with a front end loader and knock it over and scoop it up and carry it to your site. It's definitely worth getting just for the stone chimney alone. And one word of advice is that there is not enough stone in a stone chimney to rebuild a stone chimney on your property. It generally takes 2 stone chimneys in order to build back one new stone chimney. You're just going to need a bigger one, a taller one, and you need more stone to choose from. It just never works out. There's enough. And that's the same that I hold true with a log cabin here. And that is that it appears to be that there are some really fine logs in this particular cabin. But because the cabin started out short in the first place, it's only a single story tall. You definitely want 1.5 to 2 stories tall when you build your cabin. This historic cabin, generally the ceiling heights were shorter than what we consider normal today, typically more like 7 feet instead of the 8 to 9 feet is much more desirable. And then with the logs being totally gone, on the top plates being missing, and the bottom course of the logs being done as well, that there is probably enough logs here to build half of a small log cabin. There's enough here, so you can either use these logs to combine with another log cabin and create a nice one, or you can use these logs as a good backup replacement logs for another log cabin you find that, say, might have the bottom logs bad, and then you have a good source of logs here. And also another alternative would be that there's enough logs here to build a really fine log outbuilding, a log shed or something or another. And if you're considering building your own log cabin in the near future, it really is smart if you'll go ahead and build yourself a log shed. Before you do that, you'll gain a lot of experience. Your skill level will exponentially increase by the experience of working with it, of doing the notching on something small. The log outbuilding will add so much more beauty and use when it comes to finally moving into your finished future log home. You'll really appreciate that outbuilding greatly. It'll bring back a lot of memories for you. And so definitely I would procure this cabin, salvage rights on it, and get it and store it well, make sure that weather doesn't get to it. Make sure that air can circulate around the logs, and they should be good for another couple of 100 years. So it's a sweet find, and plus you're preserving history in the process of doing this. If you don't salvage that vintage log cabin, it very well might not get salvaged at all, and it'll be a waste, and that's a waste. That's a shame. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was beneficial to you. It's using vintage log cabin logs for your future log home is really smart. As a matter of fact, I've got 20 different reasons why vintage logs are better than new logs. It's not saying that new logs are bad. New logs are a great option to go with, but there's a lot of things to keep in mind that might motivate you to seek out these antique log cabins and use them for a source of material for your future home. Anyway, you guys, thanks again for tuning in here to Handmade House TV. If you want to learn how to build a log cabin from beginning to end, not make any mistakes, end up with a dream home in the end rather than going through a process of a nightmare and putting it all together, please consider signing up for the Log Cabin Academy. It's my premium course. You'll find it over at handmadehouses.com. It's well worth the tuition price. It's worth its weight in gold. I wish it had been there many years ago when I built my first log cabin, and I've built many of them since. So it's the accumulated knowledge of several decades of building log cabins, and it took me a year or two to put it together in one format that'll help anyone who has never built a log cabin before to build a log cabin as good as I can, or hopefully even better than I can. So anyway, you guys, I treasure you greatly. Thank you a lot for your likes and comments and shares. And until then, next week, we'll see you then. Bye now.